So this week we'll be looking at different types of poetry that follows certain guidelines for structure and that sort of thing. We'll talk a little bit about that today, and then there's a reading assignment on form. I also want to talk today about the poetry project that's due not this week, but at the end of next week. Let's go through the updates. Okay, so just a reminder, this is a B week, so you have formatives today, Thursday, and also on Friday. Also on Friday, I'll be sending out the advisory lesson. I think it's from the nurse this week. So I'll be sending that out to you in case you wanted to look and see what she's got going on. Progress reports upload this Friday for the second 6 weeks at East, and I think that Starfish opens for STC instructors for evaluation 2 Monday. So in case you don't know what I'm talking about, there are progress reports at STC. You could have progress reports you don't even know about if you haven't been going to Starfish, which there's a link over here. I don't want to click on it because it will open the instructor interface and it's got like people that I've flagged. So for privacy's sake, I'm not going to open that up. But on your navigation over here, you should see Starfish, and you can see if any of your STC instructors have created a flag for you. Also, you can do a kudos, which is like, hey, good job, keep up the good work kind of thing. So you can look in there. It's more or less to help you if the instructor feels like your attendance is an issue, or your work isn't up to par, or if there's some alert that they want to make. It creates an alert in the system and documents that the instructor was concerned about you. I think the alert goes to the dual enrollment office at STC, and I think it also goes to your counselor. So if there's an alert, I usually do it for anybody who's failing the course. Right now, attendance is kind of like a weird thing to do. Normally, there are 4 absences allowed in the course for the term when we're meeting face-to-face. But since we have things that are recorded, I haven't really been doing STC attendance, because how do I know if you watch the video of class later on that day, and you're essentially got all the information that you needed. So really, I've only been doing flags on Starfish for grade issues. But then the teachers can go back in, the instructors can go back in and clear any flags in case, say you turned something in, or, you went back and revised something, then they can clear that flag. But just in case you wanted to know if any of your instructors are doing that. And then the East progress reports go in Friday. I think everything should be up to date. Hopefully I'll be able to grade this homework maybe tomorrow, and then that way that will go in. The analytical essays, those papers, I'm more than halfway done with them. I would say I'm about 70% done with grading those. So those have been returned to you. If you haven't received yours, it's because I'm still doing 30% of them. So I usually do, 6, 7, 8 a day. So the rest of them will be done in the next couple of days before progress reports. I will tell you that the papers are coming in for the most part pretty well. I would say the average score on them is in the 80s, although I have had 3 papers that made 100. Then there were some problematic papers, and there were some papers that didn't really respond to the task. There were some papers that just sort of talked about the story without applying a lens. And so there are some papers that are being returned with the option to revise, because those are like 50s and below. And it's just a misunderstanding maybe in what the task was supposed to be. So with those papers, I made a note and said, if you want to, you can, do a revision, let me know. You kind of have to let me know if you want to do that, because usually I want to have a writing conference, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, just talking about what needs to happen with the paper and what your ideas are. And then usually you have a week after that to turn in the revision. But there have been a couple of papers that didn't really have a lens, and instead people were talking about, basic elements of fiction analysis, so characterization and setting and all of that, which you can look at those things with a lens, but the assignment was to use one of the 5 lenses to examine a short story. So there's some people who got that comment, but then there were other people who just did an absolutely awesome job selecting the right lens for the story, and had a great thesis and went ahead, submitted it with no errors. So I'm really impressed with the majority of the papers that are coming in. But there will be feedback on your paper. So usually I will comment on what I think was well done, what I think could have been improved. Sometimes people think I'm being critical, and I get it. Nobody likes for somebody to tell them problems with their work, but it's school and my job is to push you. So I'm always going to say, I think you did great with this, but here's something that you can work on, because we're all learning and growing. I get evaluations every year that say what I could be doing better. And I've been teaching for 28 years. So it's just part of life that we do that. And I'm here to help you through that process, but I'm not here to just validate people's current intelligence levels. So yeah, there'll be comments on there that will hopefully be helpful to you for your writing. The last thing on here, seniors, there's a lot going on right now. Well, pretty much all year there's a lot going on, but I try to keep up to date with what's happening, just so that if you don't know about something, then it gets in your mindset and you can start thinking about it. Tomorrow, the counselors are coming to a Zoom meeting, and I put the link right here during this time period. So if you don't have a class meeting, tomorrow's an asynchronous day, and if you don't have a class meeting, the counselors will meet with you tomorrow. Somebody unmuted, is there a question? No, okay. So if you need help with FAFSA, and maybe you haven't started it and you need help getting going, maybe you already started it, but you kind of got confused, or you just need help finishing it up, the counselors will be here tomorrow during this time. So starting at 9:30. And when you join that link, you'll be put into a breakout group with one of the counselors, and they'll help you with your process. If you're already done with FAFSA, there are people who've already submitted and they're done. Do email your counselor and let them know, because it's one of their objectives that they have to complete to check off all of their seniors that they have completed the FAFSA. So they're gonna bug you and look for you and email you and stuff if you haven't done FAFSA, because they're trying to encourage you to do that and check you off. But if you've already done it, then let them know and they can put a check mark, and then they won't be looking for you tomorrow. So if you don't have a class during that period, then you might want to come. Otherwise, the counselors are going to be doing other sessions and other things coming up. Hopefully you follow your counselor in the Google Classroom that they've set up, and also the College and Career Center. You get a lot of information from there. So the usual links are here for finishing Apply Texas. I've been looking at maybe 6 or 7 Apply Texas essays a week, trying to help people, refine them and get them ready to go. So if you want me to look at yours, I'm glad to. And of course, yearbook pictures are this Thursday and Friday. You should have received a notification in your email from East about your time. I think it's alphabetical. Somebody was telling me it's mainly alphabetical for Thursday and Friday. So that will be for the yearbook. And also they'll take pictures in whatever you're wearing. So you can dress up, show up. I think it's in the choir room. And I don't know if it's in the choir room in the old band hall or the new band hall. I don't know. In any case, probably there's more directions in your email. If you do not receive an email and you don't have an appointment time, then you should email Ms. Garcia, the journalism teacher, and I put her email right here. So if you want to be in the yearbook and you didn't get a notification of what time to show up, then please email her so that you can get that set up. Are there any questions about any of the update thingies? Any of these deals? No. You have to give time for people to unmute.
No questions.
No questions. Okay. There are humans out there. Yay. Okay. All right, so let's move into today's lesson. Just a reminder that there is a regular formative to do today, and a reminder about the homework check. So make sure that gets uploaded today so you can get your maximum homework points. I do want to go over the 2 reading assignments that you had for this week. The terminology should be piling up in your notebook at this point. I try to go through each one. The first reading assignment was recognizing kinds of poetry. And there are probably a lot of new terms in this section for you, even though it's only, a page long. There are some terms, and I want to talk about some of them. So wherever you have your notes from that section, maybe open to that. And if I give you additional information, then you should, jot it down. The semester exam will have terminology on it. So make sure that you have all of your notes there. The first thing they talk about in recognizing kinds of poetry is the difference between narrative and lyric poetry. I think that's a really good distinction to make. You could kind of do that in stage 1 of your 1, 2, 3 analysis. Ask yourself, is this poem telling a story? And if it is, who are my characters? What's my conflict? You can use all the story tropes to figure out what's happening in the poem. You can look at setting, you can look at, climax, you can look at all those things. If it's not a story, we call it lyric, which means it's sort of philosophical, it's somebody's thoughts on a topic, and it's not, linear and narrative and have the same elements as a story. So it's kind of good to determine whether the poem you're looking at is narrative or lyric, because then you can put a different sort of technique into play. If it's a narrative poem, use those narrative elements to try to figure it out. If it's lyric, then you have to go more with the philosophical viewpoint, and 1, 2, 3 is going to be a lot more important to you, the figurative language and so on. After that, in the text, they give you a breakdown of a couple of types of narrative poetry. Mainly there are 2, epics and ballads, and you cannot mix them up. An epic is a long book-length poem, like the Iliad or the Aeneid or Beowulf. Those of you who are with me in the 2nd semester, the first thing we'll read is Beowulf. Usually it's about a hero, it's a long adventure type story. Epics are book length. Ballads are stories, and they're usually longer poems, but a few pages at the most. Ballads are narrative. They tell the story of, some 2 people who were in love but could never be together, or some battle or something like that. And so it will usually follow a plot pattern. And usually it's got sort of a sing-songy pattern to it of rhythm or rhyme. Ballad, we even use ballad when we're talking about songs, right? That's where it comes from, because it's like a song. Lyric poetry has a number of different forms. There are others, but here are a handful of main ones that you should know. We're not going to read examples of all of these. We don't have time. This is sort of a survey of forms, so we don't have time to look at all of these types, but I will talk about them so that you could identify them. An elegy is a poem that is mourning somebody who has died, or a group of people. So it's a sad, somber poem. An ode is a poem in praise of someone or something. An aubade is a poem about the mourning time. They don't put it in your book, but I'll tell you a secret. An aubade sometimes is a poem that's written about the mourning after. So after there's been a little love connection, the aubade is sometimes about, the morning, waking up with the sun. That's all I'll say about that. Occasional poem is a poem that's written for a specific situation. Maybe if I wrote a poem, about 9/11, or I was writing a poem for somebody for their birthday, or on the occasion of finding out that a war is broken out. So it just means that not that they did it occasionally, but that there was a specific occasion for the poem. A meditation is a lyric poem that has somebody really thinking about a concept in depth and reflecting on it. Pastoral, so some of these are time period oriented. We don't see too many pastorals in contemporary poetry. Pastoral is a poem about shepherds and people out in the country, sheep and rolling hills and verdant meadows and stuff like that. They were writing those a lot in the 17th and 18th centuries. When we, those of you who will be in this class second semester, it's a different course. Second semester is British literature. And so that's a historical survey. So we start with the oldest British literature and move through to contemporary literature. Some of you will not be in this class for that. Some of you, it's not in your degree plan to take 23-21. So they will move you to a regular English 4 class. I think it's mainly the people who have the bio majors don't need the second semester. So, but you still need English 4 for your credits for East. So that in that semester, we look at the time periods and the type of writing that was happening in that time period. So some of these will pop up again second semester in that course. The last one is dramatic monologue. There were a lot of those going on in the 19th century. And dramatic monologue is when the speaker has a persona. In other words, the speaker is definitely not the poet. And they've created a character who's speaking the poem, and they are sort of letting the audience in on their inner thoughts or their crimes or whatever. And then the audience is kind of like their silent observer, kind of like a soliloquy in a play. So those are just different examples of lyric poetry. So it's good to know the difference between a narrative poem and a lyric poem. A good question on the semester exam, I'm going to give you new stories and new poems to look at on the exam and write about. And I might ask a multiple choice question, is this, read this poem, and then there might be 6 multiple choice questions after that poem. And one of them might be, is this a narrative or a lyric poem? Should be obvious if you know what they mean. So that's why it's important to know your terms. And then I might say, okay, is it an elegy, an ode, an aubade, or an occasional poem? Multiple choice type thing. I would pick something that was really obvious. And if you knew your terminology, it would be easy to pick which one that is. So are there any questions on that reading for today? That's good, just be quiet for a second. All right, the other one was figures of speech, and this one was kind of long because there were a lot of example poems. I don't think that figures of speech is a new concept for you. They mainly focus on simile, metaphor, and personification. I think English teachers have been talking about that since like 4th grade or something. So I don't think there's anything new in terms of defining those elements. I'm going to assume that you already knew what those things were. But what the book does do is it talks about examples in more academic poetry. So where do we see this happening in Shakespeare? Where do we see extended metaphor? And they talk about extended simile too. So when we talk about figures of speech, we're talking about non-literal elements. And they talk about simile, metaphor, and personification. Kind of overview them here in these paragraphs. I don't know, I don't think they talk to you about the difference between simile and metaphor on a meaning level. I mean, I think that they teach you from whatever age that a simile uses like or as and a metaphor doesn't. I get that y'all are coming through with that, but I don't know that they ever talk to you about why a poet would choose a simile over a metaphor or vice versa. So I want you to add that into your notes there, if you even took notes on this section. Maybe just read it because you're like, all right, I already know what a metaphor is. So when we think about simile and metaphor, they're both comparisons, right? But cuckoo clock. They're both comparisons, but a simile is a lighter comparison than a metaphor. Why would I say that? Because a metaphor is a direct comparison. I'm saying something is something else. It's more bold and forceful. A simile is less powerful because a simile is saying, well, it's like something else. And I'll give you an example of how that plays out. If I'm eating dinner with my family and my sister is across from me and she's being sloppy and food's like falling out of her mouth and flying all over, I could say, "You're a pig" to her, a metaphor, right? Literally, I'm calling her a pig. We could take a pig and put it in her place and it would be the same thing, is what I'm saying. That's harsh and rude. It's also rude to eat like that. But anyway, so it's saying that the thing, it can be replaced by the other thing. It's like they're the same thing. So that's the most powerful kind of comparison. A simile, if I said to my sister instead, "You're eating like a pig, stop," right? Like that's more of a suggestion and it's softer. I'm not saying she is a pig, I'm saying she's acting like one in this moment. And so that is not as harsh and not as strong. So sometimes the poet will choose a metaphor or a simile because they just want to suggest that there's some similarities that I would use a simile. But if I want to say, you know what, this is exactly what you are in this moment, then I would use a metaphor. And a good example of that is the poem that they give you. Where is it in here? That one, this one. They talk about it as an extended simile, this constantly risking absurdity. But the comparison in this poem is between a poet and an acrobat, and a simile is used. You can see it right here on line 6. The poet like an acrobat. So a poet isn't exactly like an acrobat. We don't put a poet up on a wire and make him write poetry up there, because that's not the literal bold comparison. They're saying that, Ferlinghetti's saying that a poet is like an acrobat in some ways, and then goes on with this extended simile, comparing things that an acrobat does to things that a poet does. And so in the extended version of the simile, you get multiple comparison points. But it's not as strong a metaphor as saying a poet is an acrobat. And that's the poet's choice, to either really, you know, powerfully make that comparison or more like make a suggestion. And so I don't know, that's like a fine point between metaphor and simile that we don't always draw out and say real obviously in class. So when they talk about extended simile and extended metaphor, that's when you have the same comparison going on throughout the whole piece. And that's because there are multiple elements of comparison that the poet wants to get through. And so they talk about, they put the poem and then they give you like a little explanation of that. And then this one has a lot of personification. Personification is a metaphor. So sometimes we don't separate that. You don't have to necessarily call it personification. It's just more precise than saying metaphor. The thing is that an example of personification is, of the two things that are being compared, I already know what one thing is, and it's a person. The other thing is going to be an object or an animal or an idea. I already know one half of the metaphor when I have personification. I already know that that's being compared to a person. Then after that are a bunch of example poems with questions. I'm not a big read this and answer the questions type person. That just feels kind of old fashioned to me. And whenever I have done that in the past, I feel like students don't put a lot of thought into that. I feel like maybe in the past they just get check marks for doing it or something. I don't know. I don't find that very helpful. I think it'd be better to make one of these questions a formative, or if we were in class, maybe we would talk about these questions, right? But I don't know about assigning. I'm not judging other people who do that. I'm just saying for me, I don't know. But there are a lot of really good poems in this section that use metaphor and simile in some really crucial ways. And that's the rest of that one. So are there any questions about that reading assignment? Okay.
No question.
No questions. Okay. How did I know you were going to do that? It just gets awkward, and so you feel like you have to say something, right?
Yes.
I don't know. The whole thing is awkward. I don't know. It's awkward. I feel like I'm just sitting here talking to myself most of the time, and then I finish my day and I'm like, I could have just made a video and done it one time instead of 3 times, but I don't know. Something good about having your teacher in front of you, right? Instead of a video. Even if it plays like a Netflix bad TV show. Nobody would tune in for this show if they weren't getting a grade, probably not. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the poems for this week. You should have already uploaded your homework. There were 3 poems about night, and this week the focus is going to be on form. So we will be looking at the structure of poems, and you should give extra credit for attending. No, you're expected to attend. Kind of BS is that? You do get bonus on your homework stuff because you're turning it in first. So there you go. Okay, so the poems that we read for this week, 2 of them are free verse poems, meaning that they don't have a very regimented structure to them. Nightfall and Wild Nights are poems that have some structure to them, but nothing that is regular that we could point to. Acquainted with the Night, however, I want to talk about that one a little bit because it feeds into what you're going to read this week in the form section of your textbook. So I'm just going to open that one up real quick and talk about this poem because this one has a very closed form. So we talk about open form poetry and closed form poetry, and you'll probably read that in your assignment for this week. Open form means that poets can kind of make their own choices about the arrangement of their poem. And we've only really seen that in the last 150 years or so. Prior to that, poetry had to fit, a pattern. And there were multiple patterns, but poetry wasn't free flowing. Really wasn't until Walt Whitman and some poets in the 1800s who started writing in that way with more freedom. So Acquainted with the Night is an example of a poem form that's called terzarima. Let me put that on the screen because I know that's going to be hard to spell for you if I don't put it. It's going to be, and when you see it again, you won't recognize it. So terzarima there. Y'all can see that, right? I realize that there's an annotation tool, which is pretty cool. It says you can draw. I'm going to try drawing. Oh, okay. So, oh, look, that's pretty good. All right, so terzarima is a form of poetry where you have 3-line stanzas, and they have a very specific rhyme scheme. So it's interlocked rhyme. Night, rain, light is A, B, A, but then you have lane, which is B, beat, which is C, and explain, which is B. So A, B, A, B, C, B, and then you have feet, right, which rhymes with beat. So then it's C, D, C, and then by, right, rhymes with cry. So that's D, and then height goes back to A, D, A, D, and then A, A. So you have to try to make a poem if you're writing a terzarima that has some very specific guidelines that you have to follow, like a sonnet. And you have to also put 10 syllables per line. So if you have a word that goes over 1 syllable, you have to find a different way around that. But terzarima is sort of sonnet-like. Another way that this poem has form to it is through repetition. There's this idea of I have presented in the poem, also here. And then down here we have a repetition of the whole first line. So this poem repeats this idea, I have, giving us the sense that the speaker is experienced. That repetition is the speaker saying, been there, done that. I've done this many, many times. And it sort of reinforces the loneliness of the persona of the speaker, because it's about doing these sorts of lonely things, walking out by myself in the rain at night and so on and so forth. But I wanted you to see what a closed form poem looks like. This is called closed form because you have to meet all of these different requirements for the setup and the organization of the poem. Terza rima is what this one's called. When you're reading your assignment on form, they talk a lot about sonnets. So this is like a little bit of a mutation of a sonnet, but in your book, you'll be reading several sonnets. And actually the assignment for this week, oh, that doesn't go away, I guess. There. I thought it would go away with that page, but it didn't. It's sort of annoying. All right, I'll get rid of it. Okay. All right. So the 3 poems that you'll read are all different types of sonnets, and they're down here. All right, I wanted to introduce to you also, the last thing for today is to introduce to you the project that we're going to do for poetry, which is a video. And maybe you got a chance to look it over this past week. I did put it on last week's module just so that you could start to get a heads up about what we were going to do. So maybe you had a chance to look at it. If you didn't, I'm going to officially assign it this week. There are 2 phases to this project, and the first phase is due 2 weeks. So it's on a Saturday, the 31st. So it's like a week from this Saturday, and that is a video. The second part of the assignment is where you will look at other people's videos, and that part is due, I think, the following Wednesday or something like that in November. But let's look at the project, and then I'll walk you through it, and you can ask me any questions that you have, because I imagine this week you'll start trying to get started with that process. So the video is a 10-minute video where you show yourself explaining a poem. We call that explication, when you take a poem and you analyze it. Now you can do a 1, 2, 3 analysis on the poem if you want, or you can use a different process. I don't know what they're teaching these days in pre-AP. Some people do TP-Cast or other forms, but it's going through a poem and explaining what the poet did, kind of like I did when I went through a 1, 2, 3 analysis example for you on that video. So the only qualification for the material is that I want you to choose a poem, or you can do a pair of poems if you choose, that demonstrate a social issue, that are lyric poems that talk about a social issue. I guess they could be also narrative poems, but I think you'll find a lot more lyric poetry that discusses a social issue. The social issue can be modern. In other words, it can be contemporary, something that's going on today. Black Lives Matter, something political, immigration, any of the issues that we have in our world now. Or it could be historical issue. You can go back to the Industrial Revolution and see what the concerns were of people writing poetry of the time. But the poem should demonstrate a social issue or concern. Your audience is high school students, so you're thinking in terms of explaining the poem to someone your own age, because people are going to watch your video. The second part of the assignment is after you post your video, then you will go and watch 2 of your classmates' videos and make some comments on their video. So that's the second phase of the assignment. So the first part of the phase will be a major project grade, making the video. The second part, where you go and evaluate and comment on 2 of your classmates' videos, is a minor or assignment grade for STC. So the requirements are listed here. You can choose whatever social issue speaks to you or you think is interesting. There are suffrage poems from, the late 19th century that you could look at. There are lots of options in that realm. I did put a couple of resources at the bottom to get you started. You don't have to use these resources, but if you need a kickstart into finding some poems that deal with social issues, I put a couple of links down here that you could start with. You can do your own searching as well. But you do need to choose a poem that has been published in a fixed location. In other words, it needs to be in a video that we could go and see that somebody presented, a book, an academic journal. It needs to be somewhere where we can actually see it and find it. We should be able to, you know, give a source for it. Also, I don't want you to choose a poem that uses an internet pseudonym. There are lots of websites online where people upload their own poetry, and that's cool. Like, I think that's good, sharing poetry and being creative. I think all that's good, but it's not academic. I want you to choose a poem that's been published and you have an author's name. It's not anonymous or, you know, written by Fairy Princess 123. So like if it says Fairy Princess, but it's got the real name of the author, then that's okay. But I don't want you looking at poems for this class that are written by, you know, Evil Spawn 69 or whatever. I don't think that meets the expectations for the STC course. So if you're not sure, if there's a poem that you really want to use and you're not sure if it meets that author criteria, then just shoot it my way and ask me when you're in your choosing stage, and I'll tell you if I think it's okay. Then there are some requirements specifically for the video and some for the peer evaluation that happens later. So your video needs to be, you know, I put 10 minutes, but I'm going to give you like a 2-minute grace on either side. The reason that I'm telling you that is because you have to choose a poem that has enough to say in it. If you choose a poem that's too short or too shallow, then you won't have 8 minutes worth of stuff to say about it. And you need to pick a poem that has enough depth that you can analyze it for at least 8 minutes. Your video needs to contain audio and visual elements. If you want to make a PowerPoint, you do not have to appear in your video. That's not a requirement, but at least we should hear your voice walking us through the poem. If you want to video record you annotating and doing a 1, 2, 3 on a piece of paper, that's fine. If you want to put it on the screen, like I just did with, you know, some app or some sort of Chrome add-on, then you could do it that way. If you want to just put it on a PowerPoint, whatever way you want to do it. You can appear in your video. It's just a lot of people don't even turn on their videos here in class, so I doubt that they're going to show up in the video. I don't want to make that a requirement. But your goal in the video is to help your classmates understand how the elements of poetry, this is the key right here, how your poem helps readers understand about the social issue. So you'll be talking about the different elements, poetic elements that are happening, and how those help create an understanding of the message that the poet's making about the social issue. You will also include at the end of your video 2 study questions for your audience. These should be thought-provoking. They should not be recall questions like, you know, who's the author, or what does line 12 mean if you explicitly went through line 12 in your analysis. So it should be something that gets your classmates thinking deeper about the poem, or maybe you want to point them to a specific metaphor that you didn't talk about and ask them to discuss it or whatever. But you need to have 2 study questions, because in the peer work, when you go back after everybody's posted and you're responding, you're going to answer the 2 questions that your classmate has made. So that's moving into the peer evaluation here. So after everybody posts, we're going to be posting in Blackboard in the discussion, and I'll show you about that in a second. But after you post, then you'll go and move into critique mode, and you'll answer the questions that were posed by the presenter and then give like a little feedback. So the dates are here. The video needs to be posted by the end of the day. That's Halloween. So if you're busy on Halloween, I thought Halloween was canceled, but then I heard people talking about it, so I don't know. You can turn it in beforehand, but after Saturday, people should be able to go in and see your video so that they can do the critique part, which is due the following Wednesday. By then, we will be starting the drama unit. So here's the rubric in case you want to look and see how I'm scoring it. That's already done. The rubric does have two parts to it because one part is for the video and the other part is for the peer evaluation, because there's two separate grades for this project. Your own video and then your critique of other people's videos. What else is on here? Resources, you can use these. I also put in, if you don't know how to make videos, you can just record it from your phone and just go with that. There are other people, however, who know editing tools, who will probably use them, Movie Maker or iMovie, and that's fine too if you wanted to do that. There are lots of templates in iMovie. It's pretty easy to use. It didn't take me long to figure out iMovie. Screencastify is another one that you can do where you capture the screen of whatever you're doing. So lots of teachers use those for their tutorials. I'm going to add a section here. I thought of it last period and I haven't had a chance to actually do it, but in terms of those study questions, I'm going to add a link, probably I'll link it right here, of examples, like a list of types of questions. Just obviously you would customize it for the poem that you're presenting, but just ideas to help you with good study questions for your poetry that you're presenting. All right, any questions on that assignment?
No questions.
No questions, okay. It is going to be posted in the discussion. I'm hoping that you've done class discussions on Blackboard before, but if you haven't, you can find where you're going to upload your video here. I made a video about uploading your video. That sounds dumb. I made a video about uploading the video. Where is it? I think I have to move it over here. It will look like this. I have it in this period. I have to move it over to your period. But you're probably not uploading the video this week anyway. It looks like this. So I already made the forum here and the assignment is listed here again. There's a link here, and then this is where you will do a thread. You do a thread to create the thread. Here's where I have a video on how to do it. Also, the video is over in this week's module. And then you'll post your video. Maybe it's going to be a link to a Google Drive. Maybe it's going to be linked to YouTube if you're uploading it there. Maybe you're going to just upload the entire video from your computer. Anyway, that's where it's going to be, because then once you've uploaded the video, other people can comment on it beneath it. So that's the second part of the assignment, but it's right here under class discussions, or it will be when I move the thing over to your class. All right, I think that's it for that assignment. Where are we? We talk about the homework for next Tuesday, and then that's it for today. I do want you to read about form. That's why I was talking about Acquainted with the Night and talking about Tues, so that you could start to get your feet wet in form a little bit. But do read and take notes over those pages 813 to 819. And then I want you to do a 1, 2, 3 analysis of 3 different poems. Now, I may collect one of them for homework, or I may not. I might say upload your best one, or I might say upload Spencer's Sonnet 30, or I might do that in first period and not ask you in this period. So you never know. You never know how it's going to go. But I do make it equal between the classes. So over the course of the 6 weeks, I'll take the same number of homework checks in each one of the courses. You just won't really ever know which time I'm going to ask for it or which one. So better be prepared. But I did put the docs on here. I know some people like to print them out, or you can use There's a really good tool for annotating PDFs called Cami, which you can download to your Chrome. I like it. So this one, you can just go to annotate with Cami or whatever tool you like. But if you don't have one and you want to do it virtually and not have to print it out, you can just go here and this is where you can add a text box, right? And you can type in there, you can draw in here and make some, you know, like circles. And then when you export it, you can download it with all of those things, or you can save it to your Google Drive or whatever. So you can even put shapes, you know, I don't know why you might need to circle it like that. Text box, etc. Eraser. Anyway, Cami's free. I think that's it. I put the assignment down here again just because it's coming up later on. Are there any questions about this week?
No questions.
No questions. I knew it. I knew it. All right. Well, that's it then. If you do have questions, please communicate with me. Otherwise, I should see most of you tomorrow for the FAFSA with the counselors. Here's the link right here. I'll also send through Google Classroom a reminder later on this afternoon or something with the link again, so that you remember to come if you can. All right. That's it for this week. I hope you all have an enjoyable week, and I will see you next Tuesday, if not tomorrow. Bye. It's the same time as this class, the FAFSA.